right, everybody. Welcome in to another episode of the NFL Seekers podcast. Today, we're going to be predicting and deep diving into the AFC North. We'll be talking about each team's offseason additions, subtractions, starting lineups. We'll each predict each team's records and the outcomes and the MVP and the award winner of the division. So super excited. The AFC North is probably the best division in the NFL on paper. So super excited to talk about the AFC North today.
Me too, man. AFC North is still our most viewed video from last offseason. So shout out all our AFC North people for really showing out and supporting the Seekers. Yeah, you guys went crazy on the views literally a year ago. But yeah, I'm excited to start this series again. This is our deep dive series. I'm excited to get back in it. I'm excited to talk about all 32 teams and where they rank and put our thoughts on it. But have to shout out our last podcast. If you guys didn't watch it, we had a special guest on. It was super fun. Coming off of a high, it was one of my favorite podcasts we've done. It was fun to have a guest on. So hopefully we can have more on. But if you have not checked that out, go check out our last video of us doing a 12-team PPR mock with a special guest. That was a super fun one.
Yeah, absolutely. We've been churning out fantasy content lately, and now we're on to the deep dives. We'll still have fantasy content as well. So definitely stay tuned to the NFL Secrets podcast. But we have a lot to talk about today. Four really good teams. So let's just get right into it. And, disclaimer before we even get into the first team here is I do kind of have this whole division just splitting 1-1. I think it's going to be a very tight, close division. And with that being said, let's just start with the Bengals, who finished fourth last year. Doesn't sound right, but when your quarterback goes down to injury, you can kind of expect that. So the Bengals finished with a 9-8 record last year, still very, very competitive. With Jake Browning coming in there, proved he's one of the best backup quarterbacks in the NFL. But with that, let's just go straight on to their offseason, talk about their additions, subtractions, because it's pretty safe to say this team definitely got better. They get Joe Burrow, a top 5, top 3, 2 quarterback, depending on how you look at him, back into that lineup. They franchise tag T. Higgins, which is definitely huge. So they get that going with the offense. And then a big notable addition on the defensive side, they do bring in Geno Stone, coming off a massive 7-pick season, most in the NFL last year, which is pretty crazy to say. He wasn't even a full-time starter until Kyle Hamilton and Marcus Williams kind of got banged up. So absolutely love that addition. They finally get that Taylor or Jesse Bates replacement, and that's a pretty big signing. The rest of the signings are, smaller names. Mike Gesicki, I think that could be slept on. He could be like the slot receiver in this offense. He could definitely have a nice receiving fantasy football upside in this offense. So I like that. They do bring in Sheldon Rankins from the Texans to replace DJ Reader. The Texans got outbid by the Bengals for Rankins. So that was a good addition to replace Reader. You see T. Higgins there. And then they definitely beef up the trenches. They get Trent Brown and Amarius Mims in the first round as well. So just two behemoths as right tackles. So that's pretty beautiful. Absolutely love that. Bringing Zach Moss to replace Joe Mixon. I personally think that's a 1-for-1 perfect replacement. So I definitely like that addition as well. And I think you kind of move away from Mixon and for a cheaper guy, and it's going to be the same production. So any thoughts on any of these additions?
Yeah, no, I actually really liked what they did this offseason. And obviously, the most notable thing is just getting back a healthy Joe Burrow and hopefully, his wrist injury isn't lingering or doesn't affect him. Obviously, out of camp, he does look fine. It doesn't look like, his throwing motion or his power is really lacking at all. But yeah, I mean, most important thing too, you franchise T. Higgins, you get him back with another year to pair him with Jamar Chase. That's absolutely huge. And then, yeah, like you said, you bring in the behemoths, Trent Brown, who's just a massive tackle. And then, you can never count on Trent Brown playing a full season. He's injury prone, but that doesn't matter because you got Amarius Mims right behind him. So that's going to be absolutely huge. They got to keep Joe Burrow upright. They got to keep him protected. And then obviously what stands out too is the Geno Stone. You lost Jesse Bates, probably the most underrated one, I mean, arguably the best safety in football. But Geno Stone just had himself a hell of a season, and you got him at a decent deal. So, you know, It was a pretty decent offseason, and, given how competitive they were without Joe Burrow, I mean, they were a game out of the playoffs, so, you know, given health and bearing health with Joe Burrow, I mean, this squad looks like a playoff lock. I mean, they pretty much just, one for one replaced everything, and, honestly, I think they got better this offseason.
I think they 100% got better. They were like a game out of the playoffs last year, and yeah, that is pretty crazy to think about with Burrow going down to injury. Really, the only notable losses for us are the three guys that go to the Titans. First, coach Brian Callahan. That's a great signing by the Titans. Great hiring. He's going to be awesome over there. Cheeto Awuzie and Tyler Boyd both follow him to Tennessee. So those are losses, but nothing that you can't replace, nothing that you can't handle. So very good offseason for the Bengals. Let's go on to their lineup now. Let's talk about their starting lineup. And we'll start it with the offense. This offense should be pretty electric with Joe Burrow coming back as long as he's back healthy, which we expect. It should be pretty fun and a lot of fantasy implications here as well. You got Jamar Chase and T. Higgins on the outside, two of the maybe the best duo of receivers in the NFL. So you love that. That Chase and Burrow connection goes back to LSU. Beautiful. I kind of mentioned it already, but Zach Moss, I really do think is going to be Joe Mixon. I think people are too high on Chase Brown right now, and a lot of the work will go to Zach Moss, and he'll just kind of have that same Joe Mixon role, and he'll take advantage of the touchdowns like Mixon did. And we can talk about the offensive line that was much improved. You bring in Orlando Brown, um, or you bring in Orlando Brown last year, and then you bring in Trent Brown this year, and then you also have Amarius Mims to hedge if someone gets hurt, and he's going to be a very high upside, great tackle in the future. So definitely love the outlook of this offense. I think the question mark is who's the wide receiver three, who's going to replace Tyler Boyd. That's kind of down to Charlie Jones, Yosevis, maybe rookie Jermaine Burton. I think it could maybe be Mike Gesicki, who just plays slot receiver. So do you have any takes on that one?
Personally, I've been pretty high on Jermaine Burton through the offseason. And I think, given he's pretty much just a younger version of Tyler Boyd, maybe a little bit faster and, better built. The dude's just got to keep his head screwed on and stay out of trouble. But I mean, I'm kind of banking, I think, at some point this season, it will be Jermaine Burton. I mean, they drafted him decently high and he should take over that role. But I mean, this is a pretty damn good offense, man. Just to say it, as it is. I mean, there's not much weakness. I mean, you look at Gesicki, that's probably the weakest spot of your team, but I feel like he could actually be pretty decent with Joe Burrow, Zach Moss, Chase Brown. It just feels like a Samjay P. Ryan and Joe Mixon, just great value, brand version of them. But two guys who could actually do pretty well, and you move off of aging vets, and I'm loving the way the Bengals have built their team. And Zach Moss through the first 5 weeks, when he was starting was starting in place of an injured Jonathan Taylor. He was fantastic, man. He was fantastic last year. So he's no slouch at running back. For fantasy owners out there, because this is a fantasy podcast too. Watch out for Zach Moss, man. I mean, you're going to get him at a tremendous value in fantasy football, and he's going to pay his dues. He's going to get his looks.
Absolutely. Super, super excited about Zach Moss. And if we're just talking about fantasy, I love Jamar Chase, where he's going. He's going as the wide receiver three. I have him as a wide receiver three as well. So I'm definitely taking him in my first round of drafts. I think T. Higgins is one of the best values in fantasy football. We drafted him in our most recent fantasy mock draft. So definitely check that out. Zach Moss is a top 20 running back for me. And he's going as like the running back 25, I think, or maybe even lower. So definitely really high in the situation. The offensive line was awesome last year. So let's go on to the defense, talk about this defense. They do, lose Cheeto Awuzie, who I do love. I think he's going to be a great CB1 for the Titans. But I do want to just talk about this fun secondary because I love Cam Taylor-Britt. I think he can totally plug in as a CB1 and be that lockdown alpha guy on the outside. They have DJ Turner, who they draft out of Michigan. They also drafted Dax Hill a few years ago to kind of rotate around as a safety, nickel, corner, really wherever you want him. And then you got the two back end safeties and Geno Stone and then Von Bell coming back over here after a 1 year cup of coffee in Carolina. So I do just really like the secondary. You got one of the top slot corners in the NFL and Mike Hilton, not to mention as well. So just a really fun secondary. These guys can move around, and I just really love Lou Anarumo coaching these guys up. You've got two stonewall linebackers you don't even need to talk about because Logan Wilson and Jermaine Pratt are just, they're going to be there. They're going to do their jobs. They're going to be awesome. Wilson's really smart in coverage. And I was kind of surprised they retained Pratt. I thought he was going to be someone that left in free agency. So good on them for bringing him back. Defensive line's awesome. You got Trey Hendrickson, Sam Hubbard, who are really awesome on the edge. You've got a lot of depth in Joseph Asai, Cam Sample, a lot of edge depth in there. Miles Murphy as well, who I absolutely loved coming out of Texas. So you got some studs in that rotation. You will kind of have to have Sheldon Rankins really step up for DJ Reader. But, next to BJ Hill, I think it's a pretty dang solid defense with a lot of young, versatile pieces to mix around.
And there's not much more to say than what you just said, but yeah, I mean, very solid. Obviously, Trey Hendrickson, one of the better defensive ends in football, is super fun. But yeah, there's really no holes, and the depth is good, and then the youth is good on this team. So I mean, I'm looking for this to be, upside of a top 10 defense, man. I mean, it's just really solid, very well coached, as they always have been. But yeah, I mean, this is a scary team, and yeah, I mean, the secondary. I mean, I love it. I love bringing in Geno Stone, DJ Turner, who's just an absolute speedster, who I expect to improve this year. Mike Hilton, who's just solid as a rock, man. But yeah, there's no holes on this team. I mean, they've really filled out this roster. I mean, again, it's just all bearing health for the Bengals, and it's just the number one guy, obviously, in Joe Burrow, for the whole team. As long as Joe Burrow is healthy, this team is a Super Bowl contender, in my opinion.
And one last shout out. We keep mentioning DJ Reader leaving because we love him as a player. But honestly, you bring in Sheldon Rankins, and not only him, you bring in Chris Jenkins, who I absolutely
Oh
loved
yeah.
as a prospect out of Michigan. I know Stores did too, the mutant, absolute freak. And I kind of just see him being a long-time NFL player like his father. I think he's going to play for the Bengals for a long time. Anarumo will love him. He's going to be a long-time starter, in my opinion. So that's another just great knockout pick by the Bengals. Just an awesome roster. Real quick before we go on to the next team, do you want to give your prediction? I think we've been talking so positively about the Bengals because, there's not many weak spots, and we both think they're going to be the best team in this division. Spoiler alert.
Yeah, spoiler alert, they are my number one team in the AFC North, which is no slouch because division is just an absolute bloodbath. It's an absolute fist fight. Any team that plays the AFC North, they're just knowing you're gonna feel it. You're gonna know you played the AFC North the week after you played them. So, sneak peek, the Bengals are my number one team and your number one team, and I have them at a record of 13-4, man. So I have high hopes for the Bengals. I see no reason why they should be worse than that. Um, I mean, you know, you went 9-8 with Jake Browning. Joe Burrow is worth, probably 6 to 7 more wins, but I mean, safely, I'm going with a 13-4.
Yep, I'm going 12-5, also finishing first in the division. I think it's going to be a very tight, competitive division. Like I said, they might all split in their head-to-head games, but I do think the Bengals come out on top. I think this roster is just so beautifully well constructed. I love Zach Taylor so much, so I definitely am high on this Bengals team. I love Lou Anarumo as well. Anything else you want to say before we go on to the Steelers?
Let's get on to the Steelers.
Yeah, Steelers will be a very, very fun discussion, a very polarizing team to talk about here, a very busy offseason as well. They finished 10-7 last year. They got the playoff berth, obviously, led by Mason Rudolph at the end of the year. So, the Steelers are always going to be right in there. No matter what, they're going to be in that playoff race at the end of the year. And it is safe to say they got a little bit better this offseason. How much better? That's a question that I guess will have to be answered. But, Russell Wilson, as bad as he was last year, he is an upgrade over Mason Rudolph. I guess it just depends on how big of an upgrade that will be ultimately. But with that, let's go on to their off-season additions and subtractions. They didn't really lose anyone other than Mason Rudolph to the Titans as well. The Titans are just
And
signing
and
everyone.
and I mean, it doesn't have it on there. It's disrespectful. Kenny Pickett to the Eagles, man. Disrespectful. Not even putting that as a loss, man.
That's crazy. They just forgot about him off the face of the earth. I do want to say the other really only loss is Deontay Johnson. I think that was a pretty bad trade. You do bring in Dante Jackson, he's going to start, but I don't even think that was a fair trade value wise. I think Deontay Johnson still has some left into the tank, and I know he didn't really want to be here, it seemed, but I do think that value that you got back from Deontay Johnson wasn't the best, but we'll talk about the additions, and we'll start it off with quarterback Russell Wilson. Like I said, it is an upgrade. How much of an upgrade? Not much. It's to be seen, but we'll see how this meshes with Arthur Smith. I do think that him and Arthur Smith, philosophy wise, don't really mesh well because Russell Wilson does not throw over the middle of the field, actually the least in the NFL at throwing over the middle of the field. And the backup, another addition we can talk about, Justin Fields, that they bring in, which was great value. Why not bring him in if no one's going to bring him in to be a starter? I think that was a great shot in the dark by the Steelers. I think he will be starting, somewhat soon. But yeah, it just will be interesting to see how they mesh with Arthur Smith's offense. That is definitely interesting. Do you have any takes on the quarterbacks right now?
I know Russell Wilson is the starter. As we mentioned in our last podcast, we don't know for how long. I would love to see Justin Fields, this be Justin Fields' team. I think Justin Fields would actually mesh very well with Mike Tomlin and Arthur Smith more than Russell Wilson. But it is, I mean, nonetheless, you upgraded your quarterback room. You did get better. I mean, Mason Rudolph and Kenny Pickett is pretty abysmal. It's pretty awful. And the fact that you were able to have a playoff run with those quarterbacks is an applaud to Mike Tomlin just refusing to have a losing season, refusing to have his quarterback play affect where the team goes. So I mean, it's just props to one of the greatest coaches in the history of the NFL and Mike Tomlin. Um, but yeah, I mean. It is to be seen. It is to be seen to how these quarterbacks play in this offense. It will be interesting. It is an upgrade though.
Absolutely. And you get Russell Wilson for 1 million. So both of the investments are smart investments. Totally understand the thinking. And this team is fully set up for 2025, as we'll see with the roster. They're ready. They're damn ready to compete. So we'll talk about one of the biggest reasons they're ready to compete right now is they get one of the biggest free agency signings, one of the biggest surprises of free agency, and Patrick Queen coming over from the division rivals Ravens, one of the biggest rivalries in the NFL. He comes right over to the Steelers, and that's an awesome signing. He's coming off a fantastic season, absolutely athletic, great in coverage. So super excited to see him here. We'll talk about him with the defense in a second. They bring in Quez Watkins and Van Jefferson for Russell Wilson, two kind of deep threat outside guys. Not the most exciting number 2 and 3 receivers in the NFL. I'll definitely say that. One of the weaker receiving weapon cores in the NFL. And then the last addition was really Dante Jackson for Deontay Johnson. Like I said, didn't love that board or didn't love the value of that trade. And then I guess we would kind of be remiss to not mention they did have the best draft class again in the NFL. I think 2 years in a row, we've given them the best draft class in the NFL.
I mean, yeah, just to speak on their draft because it needs to be talked about. I mean, what they were able to do with all the value of, I mean, Troy Fatanu had no business being there, doubling down on the offensive line and getting Zach Frazier at an incredible value, adding Roman Wilson, Peyton Wilson. I mean, even low key guys like Logan Lee. I mean, they absolutely tore up this draft. They did not miss one pick. They took value at every single pick, and surprise, surprise, back to our NFL draft grades. We graded the Steelers as the best team in the NFL. They had the best draft, and I mean, it was just quite honestly perfect, man. It was inspirational stuff.
It was a beautiful thing to watch. It really was. And like we didn't even mention Mason McCormick. Let's just talk about this offensive line right now because this graphic does have Dan Moore starting. I hope to God Dan Moore doesn't start over Troy Fatanu because that would be the biggest tragic travesty of my life. And I would make sure that every coach on the Steelers gets fired. Start Troy Fatanu day one, please. He was a top 12 player in the class for me. I absolutely loved him. He killed the combine, proved he can be a starting left tackle in the NFL. So I absolutely love that. Opposite of Broderick Jones, who was one of my favorite tackles in last year's class. And then you've got two really solid guards already in Sayamalu and Daniels. And then something kind of slept on. You do draft Mason McCormick. And I think Mason McCormick, not right now, but maybe a year or two from now, he can be the future starting guard for this team. And, I think you draft 3 future starting offensive linemen in this class because Nate Herbig won't be starting for long. I think Zach Frazier should be starting day one. He was an awesome prospect. He was injured, and that's the only reason he fell. But he's that former wrestler background. He's an awesome center prospect. He's like the Creed Humphrey type. So that's a huge high floor piece that you get on the offensive line as well. That'll really help out the backfield, Russell Wilson, Justin Fields, Najee Harris, Jalen Warren. the Jalen Warren and Najee Harris discussion is definitely interesting. I think with Najee being in that contract year, we will see Jalen Warren implemented more. Jason brought up a good point in our podcast, our mock draft podcast, that the Broncos targeted running backs more than any team in the NFL last year, because that's kind of Russell Wilson's play style. If he senses pressure, he Derek Carrs and he will dump it off immediately. So I think Jalen Warren's in for a big reception season, bigger than he's ever had. So I definitely think you should keep an eye on that for fantasy. Want to talk about really one receiver, and that is George Pickens. We saw Russell Wilson definitely made Cortland Sutton relevant in the touchdown department last year, and I think that'll continue with George Pickens. Pickens is just such a freak. You just throw it up to him, he'll come down with it. You throw it up to him, he'll probably beat the corner on him. He's just a really awesome player. Ended the season greatly last year. So I do think Pickens in that Sutton role is going to have a really nice fantasy football year. Don't really want to talk about the other receivers, honestly, but I do want to ask you, with Arthur Smith coming in, we know how his offenses ran. How do you feel about Pat Freiermuth and maybe even Darnell Washington? You know, they love those tight ends.
Oh, dude, any offense ran under Arthur Smith scares the hell out of me. I don't even know what to think. I'm so scared for the fantasy options. I mean, I'm scared for Najee Harris and everything. But I do want to just talk about one person, and that is Roman Wilson, because the Steelers have just been notorious for getting value at wide receivers in the mid to late rounds. And Roman Wilson, coming from a pro style offense, is a very fluid football player. And man, I mean, there's not much that lacks in his game. And so I'm incredibly excited to see what he can do in this offense. Obviously, I feel like there's a cap on everyone's potential just because of Arthur Smith. But, maybe him not being head coach is a good thing. I mean, I feel like, Mike Tomlin is, will obviously oversee and override Arthur Smith on a lot of things. So I'm hoping and praying, that, it's not a Bijan Drake London type situation. I really hope not.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Pickens is really the only guy I'm targeting in fantasy. Maybe Najee and Jalen Warren will fall to me late in drafts. And I do like you shouting out Roman Wilson. We both absolutely loved him. He kind of had shades of Chris Olave in his route running and his tape. And even in the Senior Bowl, he absolutely killed the Senior Bowl, the way he separates with acceleration downfield. He's really awesome. I love Roman Wilson. He killed the Senior Bowl. He was the only guy that could beat Quinyon Mitchell. So absolutely love that. Let's move on to the defense, which is the staple of the Steelers, always has been. It's this badass, hard-nosed style of defense, and it starts with TJ Watt, Alex Highsmith. You see they both get plus 90 grades in PFF last year. Absolutely awesome seasons. TJ Watt has had a shout for Defensive Player of the Year for like 5 years now, and I feel bad that he hasn't won it. We'll talk about that in our predictions later. But you get Keanu Benton in there, Larry Ogunjobi, Cameron Hayward in the interior. That's just a crazy pass rush with a lot of young depth as well. Like we said earlier, Logan Lee was an awesome prospect. Corners, I guess we'll talk about the linebackers real quick because I love the front seven. Patrick Queen, great addition. Absolutely love that. Cole Holcomb's listed there. I hope that to God that Cole Holcomb does not start, because he had an abysmal season. I think it will be a Landon Roberts who comes over from Miami. I'm almost positive that he's going to start with Patrick Queen, and that's a really good compliment. You got that thumper with the athletic Patrick
Peyton
Queen. So
Wilson? Peyton Wilson, do you think there's a
yeah,
chance?
that was a great pick as well. I think Peyton
That was
Wilson.
steal, one of the steals of the draft, one of their many steals of the draft.
Yeah, that was a stupid steal, and I think he should be over Holcomb in the depth chart. I don't think you start him day one because the injury concerns were scary with him. That's why he fell. They said that he might not have an ACL. So I do think that Roberts will start for the floor. But yeah, I think Peyton Wilson's a very nice high upside. Another guy that they have just kind of on the bench waiting in the wings to go shine in this great front seven. The secondary is where I get a little bit suspect. Obviously, you have Minka Fitzpatrick. Everyone loves him. One of the best safeties in the NFL. Joey Porter Jr. Absolutely loved him coming out of Penn State. Great draft pick. Is the first pick in the second round in that Chase Claypool trade, which is crazy to say. But the rest of the secondary is where I kind of get a little bit hesitant. They do bring in Deshaun Elliott from the Dolphins. They bring in Dante Jackson from the Panthers, two players coming off, pretty mid seasons. And then the depth in that corner room is definitely nothing really to talk too much about it all. I liked Corey Trice coming out, but he's proved absolutely nothing in the NFL. Like Darius Rush coming out, not really. I'm kind of not surprised that he got cut off a few teams already. But yeah, I just think the secondary might kind of be the downfall at the end of the day when you have Lamar Jackson, Joe Burrow in your division. I don't really want to say Watson, but you've got some high-powered offenses in your conference and division, and I do think the secondary might be the downfall here.
Yeah, I mean, but this is just a team that's just coached incredibly well. And so, I don't even really that from my point of view, I don't worry about it too much just because you have TJ Watt, you have Cam Hayward up front and Highsmith. So, you're getting after the quarterback and you're getting there quick. And so, obviously it's not the best secondary in the world, but you do have Mika Fitzpatrick there, arguably one of the best safeties. And again, I just see this being, the upside of a top 12 defense in the NFL. I don't see why they can't be. I love what they did in the draft. I love that they added Logan Lee to that line. I think Peyton Wilson's one of the most, exciting prospects. I, kind of talked we kind of everyone kind of talked about him kind of being like a Luke Kuechly, S guy, just super freak athletic, can cover incredibly well, but this is a team with high upside, and the defense has upside to it. I mean, Joey Porter Jr. does have upside, but I'll say I think they could finish as a top 12 defense.
Yeah, absolutely love that with, the coaching and the culture. I definitely could see it with TJ Watt leading the charge. And let's just talk about, the end product. Let's talk about how we project this team to end up record-wise. And I'm just going to get out of the way. They have one of the hardest schedules I've seen. I looked at pretty much every team's schedules, and this is a tough, rough schedule. You start out really rough as well. Russell Wilson last year, I will say it, I'm a Broncos fan. So I'm kind of biased, I guess, but he really was rough at the end of the year. He evades pockets so fast. He'll feel pressure that's not even there, and he'll run in circles and try to play that hero Russell Wilson ball, and he does not throw over the middle of the field, which is why Judy was irrelevant, which is why he powdered every single week, and that's kind of Arthur Smith's offense. So I think it's just going to be a weird, odd mesh that I can't predict. I can't bet to really work out. So I do have them finishing last in the division with an 8-9 record. That brutal schedule will not help Russell Wilson at the end of the day, but it's not all negative because this team, as we saw with the roster, it's so locked and loaded and ready for 2025. I think they're a scary, scary team in 2025.
You said it. Me and you are right on the same pace. Again, I had them finishing with an 8-9 record, last in their division, but it's no slouch to them. It's just an incredibly tough conference and an incredibly tough AFC North. And I just feel like the quarterback play is a little bit superior by the other teams. But like you said, this team is set up for 2025. Maybe Justin Fields is the future. Maybe they get a high draft pick and they're able to get somebody in the 2025 NFL draft. So, it's to be determined, but, the future is bright for this team. I just think this might be the year where, they finally finish under, 500.
Yeah, they're going to be right there. Their over under is 8.5 right now, which surprisingly is the same exact over under as the Browns. That is very interesting. That's a good transition into our next team, the Cleveland Browns. And I'll just be honest, I don't see a world where the Browns and Steelers finish with the same record. I think Vegas is a little bit off on that. That might be something that I want to put some money on. Not that I want to bet on Deshaun Watson, not the greatest, promotion for the Browns here, but you finished last season with an 11-6 record going to the playoffs. Joe Flacco leading an absolutely electric end of the season. It was like just Linsanity type of magic that happened at the end of the season. They do lose in round one of the playoffs, 45-14, sadly. But this is my favorite defense in the NFL. Absolutely love the roster. I was on record saying last year that this is the most locked and loaded, just stacked roster on paper, in my opinion. So with that, let's go on to their offseason. I think it's safe to say they got slightly better. You get your quarterback back, but I think you can't really say they definitely got better until we see Deshaun Watson prove something. He's got to go out there and prove something. He really, really, really does. So we'll talk about his additions, what they add to Watson this year, and they lose Flacco, so they go out and bring in Jameis Winston and Tyler Huntley. So yeah, you got some pretty you got three deep and decent backup quarterback options if Watson doesn't work out. But weapon wise, they add Deontay Foreman, they had Jerry Judy, who they go out and trade for, who he could be good. He will be the wide receiver 2 in this offense and should be Cedric Tillman as a 3. Jerry Judy should be playing a lot in the slot, which fits his role best. And it's an upgrade to Elijah Moore, who I think Elijah Moore really shouldn't be on an NFL roster. So I do like, throwing the dart at Judy. There really wasn't too much of a price that you had to pay. So I like the value in that addition. Not really too many additions at all. You kind of just have some re-signings. You got Maurice Hurst, Shelby Harris, re-signings, Zadarius Smith, and I liked all of those signings last year. I said in the deep dive that they were good signings, so I'm happy that they come back on 1-year deals again. They do lose. They're kind of only 2 losses of their 2 linebackers outside of JOK, Anthony Walker and Sione Takitaki, and they do replace them kind of with Jordan Hicks and Devin Bush, which is, a little bit of a downgrade, but nothing that you're going to trip about when this defense could be the best in the NFL. The secondary pass rush is awesome. So, nothing crazy in this offseason.
Yeah, there's nothing that really stands out too much. Honestly, I'm a little mad that they lost Joe Flacco. I thought Joe Flacco, played some lights out football, and I thought he deserved to, be re-signed and push for that starter spot with Deshaun Watson. Because I'll say it right now, dude, Deshaun Watson scares the hell out of me. I feel like he's kind of become soft. I feel like he's just maybe not what he was in Houston. And, obviously the Browns are kind of married to him because they gave him a fully guaranteed contract and absolutely gave him the bank and gave up a lot for him. So they're kind of forced into this marriage that I feel like eventually they're going to have to get out of because I'll just be honest. I'm not confident that Deshaun Watson is good at all anymore. I would maybe even push to say Jameis Winston maybe gives you even a higher floor just because he can push the ball downfield and he can make games exciting. He can light up a scoreboard. He might throw 4 picks, but he's going to light up the scoreboard. He's gonna keep throwing until you get some points. So it's an interesting offseason. I feel like they stayed pretty stagnant in my opinion, just not much going on. Re-signings, you didn't do anything super flashy. Obviously, Jerry Judy comes over. I think he gets slightly better at the wide receiver position. You didn't have any top draft picks. You didn't have a first round pick this year. I think what they did do with their draft picks, they did do good. But kind of stagnant feeling from me going into the 2024-25 season.
Yeah, so safe to say it was, they either stayed the same or they slightly got better this offseason. But with that, let's go on to the roster portion because this is a big, big question, a good talking point here. And there's 2 big question marks in this backfield. We have no clue what's going to happen in 2024. That is Deshaun Watson, who you kind of just laid it out perfectly. And then we've got Nick Chubb, who's coming off a brutal, brutal injury, tearing multiple things in his leg that was already injured. So that is very brutal. We don't really know what's happening with Nick Chubb at all. Whenever anyone asks the coaches or Nick Chubb about it, he kind of just points to the mental aspect of coming back, and that is difficult. It will be, a long journey. So I actually have no clue. It might be Jerome Ford to start the season, and that's fine. I absolutely love him as a backup, but that is a big question mark. I know you love Nick Chubb. You've been on record saying he's probably the best runner of the football in the NFL when healthy, and he's proved that. So yeah, I think that's kind of the talking point here with this offense. That's kind of all that matters is Deshaun Watson. How is he going to do? He looked like a non-NFL quarterback last year. He really did. He looked scared. He looked timid. He was just panicking. He was leaving empty pockets, kind of like Russell Wilson as well. So the pocket presence, the confidence needs to be there. He needs to get that back. He needs to go back to his Texans form really badly for this team.
100%. And that's what I mean, obviously you probably got the best offensive line in football. It's been like that for years. Kevin Stefanski, you have established a run game. It really, I mean, obviously, like I said, Nick Chubb is, in my opinion, the best runner of the football. He's incredible. He's impossible to bring down. His center of gravity is just different from other people's. But I mean, no slouch in Jerome Ford, man. And then you got big Deontay Foreman coming over too. So I mean, you can run the football. You've established that. You have the line to do it. You have capable receivers. I do kind of like Cedric Tillman, Jerry Jeudy, and Amari Cooper. It's a decent trio. David Njoku was incredible last year. But yeah, I mean, this team solely relies on how Deshaun Watson plays. That's just pretty much what it is. If Deshaun Watson was Deshaun Watson of last year, you're still probably good enough to make the playoffs because the team around him is just so darn good. But you know, your capacity, your capability of reaching a Super Bowl is capped with Deshaun Watson because he's not up there right now with how he's playing with the Mahomes, with the Burrows, with the Herberts, with the Josh Allens. He's just not on that level until he proves otherwise.
He's got to compete with the quarterbacks in this division to have a chance, at the Browns reaching that level, getting over that playoff hump. So that is big. That is something that we need to keep an eye on. I do want to shout out Cedric Tillman, maybe even Jamari Thrash, because I do think they're both far better receivers than Elijah Moore. So one of them should step up and be that nice receiver three. You've got the upside in there with Judy, a former top 15 pick. We all know he has upside if he can, click. Maybe him and Deshaun Watson click, hopefully. If not, then there might be a little bit of a more lower floor. And the only really other thing we need to talk about is Njoku was more productive with Joe Flacco. I don't have stats to prove it to prove it right now, but I know for a fact Deshaun Watson did not target Njoku nearly as much as Flacco. So hopefully Watson, you watched the Browns last year and saw how great Njoku was as a receiver because he was awesome, and they need to get him really involved. You already touched on the offensive line, not to be lazy, but it's a perfect offensive line. They bring in one of our favorite prospects in the class, one of the steals of the draft, and Zach Zinter to be that future starting guard, even though they have three
You got,
great.
DeJuan Jones too, who's just an incredible player, but as a swing tackle, backup tackle, it's perfect, man. The line has been perfect.
The Browns just draft so well. They've just been stacking up this team with depth and just great draft picks. You absolutely love to see it. With that, we'll move on to the defense. And I just want to start it out with my favorite draft pick of the entire class, one of my favorite players in the class. They get Michael Hall out of Ohio State in the second round, and I absolutely loved him as a top 5 defensive lineman for me. I think he's going to be awesome, eventually filling in for Shelby Harris when, Shelby Harris is only on that 1-year deal. So I do love the Browns defensive line. You've got the number 1 graded edge rusher in Myles Garrett, the defensive player of the year. If you watched our AFC North deep dive last year, I predicted Myles Garrett to be the defensive player of the year in the NFL. It played out well. I predicted that all offseason, and he played his ass off from week 1. He was the favorite to win the award because he was just a monster all season. He was that dude for this Browns defense. And like I said, I do think this is the best defense in the league if they can just stay healthy, if they can stay out there and click. I just absolutely love everything about it. You got Martin Emerson, Denzel Ward, Greg Newsome as a corner trio. That's my favorite corner trio in the NFL by far. Grant Delpit, Juan Thornhill on the back end. I just love the way this defense is built. JOK is an awesome, athletic, fun linebacker that can move around. The 2 other linebackers next to him, not the most exciting in Jordan Hicks and Devin Bush, but neither were Taki and Anthony Walker last year. So I do think, it's going to be a similar defense to last year, a definite top 5 defense.
Yes, yeah, it's a lock, top 5 with the potential of being number 1. I mean, you pretty much said all that needed to be said, but I mean, when you got guys like Myles Garrett, Denzel Ward, Owosu Koromoa, it's just you have everything at every level that you need, and it's a perfectly built defense, and the addition of Michael Hall, who a lot of people, you know, I feel like he's gonna show out, and he's gonna prove why he should have been one of the higher draft picks. You called your shot on Michael Hall. I feel like that's gonna play out perfectly, especially in this Browns defense. But yeah, I mean it's a hell of a defense, and it's what's gonna keep them competitive in this division.
Yeah, not even to mention Zadarius Smith, Dalvin Tomlinson on that defensive line, Quentin Jefferson. They bring in a Garankro, who had a pretty solid season coming over from Houston. So I absolutely love this defense. It's stacked, it's locked and loaded, and just absolutely ready. So we'll go on to our predictions for the Browns. I do have them finishing at 10-7, third in the AFC South, or sorry, AFC North. And spoiler alert, it's the exact same prediction as yours. We both have them finishing third in the division at 10-7. And I think that's pretty fair. They do have to prove something with Deshaun Watson. That's really what it comes down to. The most important position in sports, Deshaun Watson's going to have to come through.
Yes, and yep, I mean me and you have been pretty similar throughout this whole thing. Then 10-7 is not a bad record, man. I mean, that's playoffs right there. That is playoffs where there's absolutely no hate. There's just Bro, it's a brutal division, man, and yeah, like we said, it really comes down to Deshaun Watson, and Deshaun Watson is what's gonna either propel and excel this team to Super Bowl aspirations, or he's gonna be what sinks it. So it kind of goes in either one of two ways, and so they're gonna be good no matter what, just because this team is built so damn good. But yeah, I mean it all falls on the shoulders of this man right here.
This man right here, the most interesting man in the NFL, Deshaun Watson, just absolutely awesome. I do want to say Vegas has their win total, like I said earlier, at 8.5, which is the same as the Steelers. I don't agree with that. They had 11 wins last year with Joe Flacco, so I do think this defense is enough to carry him to 10 wins. I'm personally betting the over on the 8.5 before it changes because I think that's just a bad line, honestly. So with that, let's move on to the last team that we will talk about, and that is the Baltimore Ravens, who finished 13-4 last year. Pretty safe to say they were the best team in the NFL in the regular season. They really were, and that is kind of the discussion that we'll have here is, in the regular season, they got to get over that Chiefs hump. That's ultimately what needs to be done. I think, we can get into their offseason right now because I do think that they might have gotten a little bit worse, maybe not roster wise, but you lose Mike McDonald, in my opinion, one of the brightest young defensive minds in the NFL. I know you replace him, you with a similar scheme, and it'll be pretty much the same defense being ran. But you also lose Weaver to go be the defensive coordinator for the Dolphins. So I do think the coaching losses are something that definitely do need to be talked about here, and definitely acknowledged. They also lose Morgan Moses, the starting right tackle, to the Jets, and you will have a rookie starting at right tackle. So that is also something to keep an eye on. So I don't think it's a lock to say that the Ravens got better. I mean, look at all the people that they moved on from here on the right side of the screen. There's a lot of players that moved on, on top of the coaches. Some notable names. Geno Stone led the league in picks. Obviously, that was a kind of a no-brainer because you do have Marcus Williams and Kyle Hamilton, but you lose Patrick Queen to your division rival Steelers. That's a big, big signing. But let's go on to the additions because they bring back a top 10 free agent in Justin Madubuike. I think we both expected him to go to the Steelers or Seahawks with Mike McDonald, and the Ravens secured him, and it will be interesting to see how he does outside of McDonald's season or system because he had that breakout season with Mike McDonald coaching him up, and I have no doubt he will be that top 10, top 15 defensive lineman. He was awesome last year. And then, you bring in Derrick Henry to come over and one of the most beautiful visions right now in sports really is Lamar Jackson and Derrick Henry backfield. That's just so fun to think of even. It just sounds crazy.
Yeah, I'm just gonna have to throw this out from a fantasy aspect. It's gonna be wild, man. You've got arguably, I mean, there's not when you think of bell cow running backs, there's really not many left in the NFL, but Derrick Henry is one. And then you pair him with the best running quarterback of all time in Lamar Jackson, and it's gonna be just a crazy one-two punch. One of the things I'm most excited about watching in the NFL this season is those two in the backfield together. But you're right. I can't honestly say that I feel like they got better. I feel like they had a decent draft, obviously getting crazy value with Nate Wiggins at I believe it was pick 28 or 27. But I don't feel like they got better. I feel like they lost a lot of depth. You lose Geno Stone, Mike McDonald leaving is the biggest loss. I mean, what they had in that defense last year was incredible. He's one of the brightest minds in football. Obviously, he was going to get a head coaching job. Maintaining Madubuike was huge to this team. I mean, he was incredible, one of the top 5 defensive tackles in football. But it is hard to say they got better. But yeah, I mean, and like you pointed out at the beginning, is this team ready to compete with the Chiefs? Can they get over that hump? I mean, what happened in the playoffs was brutal. There were some boneheaded plays. Obviously, controversial calls. The, famous Zay Flowers fumble at the 1 yard line or in the end zone was just brutal. I mean, they were a better team than the Chiefs. It's just like this. It's this head game that the Chiefs have over everyone else, and it's this mental game. And the ball falls the Chiefs' way, and it's just like, can that happen for the Ravens? Because roster wise, I'd argue they are a better team than the Chiefs.
Yeah, I would argue a lot of teams are, but the
Yeah.
Chiefs just have this evil Darth or where they're gonna be there at the end. They're gonna be in the Super Bowl. Let's just be real. Every year it just sucks, man. It really does. And the last thing I want to say is they do lose Jadeveon Clowney to the Panthers, who had a fantastic breakout season last year at 31. He was insane, and they do replace him with Kyle Van Noy and Adisa Isaac, who has some undisclosed injuries as of today, actually. So that will be interesting. Kind of a youth movement going in there for Clowney, but David Ojabo gets hurt again, and that's terrible. I hate to hear that. So with that, we'll go over to the lineup and we'll talk about this offense first. And it's so fun to talk about. I don't know why the hell Keaton Mitchell is at running back. Maybe PFF is just favoring him because of that 92.4 PFF grade, but he was literally placed on the pup today, so he won't be the guy. It will be Derrick Henry and Lamar Jackson in that backfield. Such a fun just vision, such a fun talking point. That's going to be so awesome to watch the Ravens just pound the ball down teams' throats every single week consistently, relentlessly. I absolutely love it. With that, theme, let's talk about the offensive line, who there's a lot of turnover in the offensive line. I do want to say I disagree with this graphic with PFF pretty tremendously because I don't think Josh Jones will start at left guard. I do think Andrew Voorhees will start at left guard, who we liked coming out of USC. We knew he'd be kind of a 1 year get healthy type of guy, but I think he's totally capable of starting. It's kind of like Zach Zinner this year. That's how Andrew Voorhees was last year. So I do think he ends up winning that left guard job. It could be close, but yeah, I do see him winning it over Jones. And then right tackle, they have Patrick Mekari. I think they keep Mekari as the swing tackle that he's been so good at for years now. And I do think Roger Rosengarten, the third round pick, or sorry, late second round pick out of Washington, he will start at right tackle. And, he started at right tackle for a while in Penix's blind side. So I do think he's capable. He's got a high floor, but, it's a question mark at the end of the day when you move on from Morgan Moses, who's been great for so long, for Rosengarten. So I do think that the offensive line has some movement, but Linderbaum in the middle, he's awesome. Ronnie Stanley's been one of the best tackles when healthy, which is something big. But yeah, I do think that there's nothing to worry with this offensive line, with this run game. It's going to be beautiful. Keaton Mitchell is a great backup to have when he comes back. And then the receiving game, it's really just, Zay Flowers has to take that big step up. He was awesome last year as a rookie, but, he could be even better. He could, he had some drops last year. He had some fumbles at the end of the year that really cost him. I think he could, really focus on his game and become an elite receiver.
100%, yeah, you just hit the nail on the head right there. But yeah, I'm looking at ESPN's and they do have a little bit better upgraded. I feel like they put the roster a little bit better. They have Roger Rosengarten starting with Daniel Falele as the backup at right tackle. And then yeah, left guard. They do have Voorhees starting in here, and obviously Derrick Henry is the running back. But Dan, one person that's interesting candidate that they drafted was Tez Walker out of North Carolina. What do we make of Tez Walker this year? Do you think he pushes for a starting spot? Do you think he's a good football player? What do you make of him? I mean, I was awfully low on him just because of the concentration, the drop issues that he had all off season. But I mean, the athlete himself is pretty incredible.
Yeah, he was definitely in his head this offseason for sure. He ended the season rough and he was in his head in the bowl games and the combine. And I do think him and Troy Franklin were players that were overhated with the drop issues. I do think it's something that can be figured out. And when you look at the receivers in this room, like he is Rashad Bateman. Like if Rashad Bateman doesn't work out, he didn't really have a good season last year with that 61 PFF grade. If he doesn't, get better, like the Ravens are saying he's gotten better this offseason, if he doesn't, I think Walker's a great hedging for Bateman to be that outside guy. You kind of got Hardy and Nelson Aguilar locked in as a slot. So I do think he's got a chance if Bateman doesn't hit the ground running and kind of just is stagnant like he was last year. I do think that Tez Walker could go out there and maybe surprise some people with nothing really to lose. He's got a lot to prove, as that fourth round pick. He fell in the draft. So I do think Lamar Jackson could kind of boost him. And I do actually, I'm more optimistic than not.
Yeah, 100%. And yeah, I mean, this offense, I'm just going to give it an overall grade. It's pretty damn good. I just really wish they could address that. I feel like it's been a constant theme for the Ravens too. Is just not ever having that consistent wide receiver two play. It just seems like they've struggled to find that wide receiver two. I do love Mark Andrews and Isaiah Likely though as your two second best options with Zay Flowers, but it's a damn good offense, and they're going to be very, very competitive in that. And this run game is just going to be lethal.
Yeah, you can kind of look at the receiving cores like Zay Flowers, Mark Andrews, Isaiah Likely, and Aguilar and Bateman because Andrews really will be the wide receiver one in this offense. The offense will run through him like usual. But let's go to the defense. Like I said, they do lose Mike McDonald. We really lose some pieces like Patrick Queen in there. But, it's the Ravens at the end of the day. They're going to be running that same hybrid defense that's really hard for offenses to game plan for. So I guess we'd kind of be remiss to not start it off with Kyle Hamilton, one of my favorite players in the NFL, 86.4 grade last year. Great, great pick. They just let the value fall to them. He was a great prospect coming out of Notre Dame, got overhated as well. And I absolutely love him to kind of, you could pair with Marcus Williams in that back end of your defense. I think it's an awesome safety duo. I think Geno Smith leaving was kind of logical as long as they stay healthy. I said Geno Smith, Geno Stone. I think it's a great safety duo. So you do have a kind of a question mark in the middle of the defense with Roquan Smith. They lose Patrick Queen, so going in for Patrick Queen, it's kind of just Simpson, maybe. I don't know. I don't really like
It's
Blake
pretty
Harrison.
rough linebacking core outside of, I mean, Roquan Smith is obviously, one of the top 5 best linebackers in football. The dude's incredible, but I mean, it's interesting after that. I mean, Chris Board, Trenton Simpson, Josh Ross. It's pretty bad. It would have been a position that would have liked to seen address, or I wish they could have, maintained that duo with Patrick Queen and Roquan Smith. But I'm gonna just say this right now. I think Kyle Hamilton and Marcus Williams is the best safety duo in the league. I think it's a tier above. I mean, it's close. There's a lot of good safety duos, but I think they are just a slight tier above everyone else.
It's such a complimentary safety duo. It's absolutely beautiful with the Bills safety duo kind of breaking up. I definitely agree with that. But yeah, like back to Trenton Simpson, I just wasn't the highest on him. He's a really, really raw player. He did have a 76.3 PFF grade for when he did play last year, which is, positive, but he's a really raw player. So hopefully he can, hit his upside like Patrick Queen did next to Roquan Smith. There's no better linebacker in the NFL to help you out in that sense. But we'll go on to the edge rush. They do lose Jadeveon Clowney, like I mentioned, and I do think adding Adisa Isaac is huge because Ojabo goes down with injury again, and that's kind of his problem. He's got so much upside, but he goes down with injury. So, Owe, his high school teammate, by the way, is going to have to really, really take that big step up with no Clowney here, and he's going to have to be an alpha, productive edge rusher one for this team with Van Noy, kind of, 34 years old, opposite of him. It's kind of got to be Owe and Madubuike just completely getting the pass rush chops here. You've got Pierce, who's more of that nose run stopper, who's really good in his role. Jones was a great pick as well. So, it's a very good stacked team. Like, I mean, you look at the PFF grades; they all have very solid PFF grades. The corners is kind of Marlon Humphrey, and they drafted two really, really good corners this year, and Nate Wiggins and TJ Tampa, who we both loved, great values where they went. Nate Wiggins has so much potential opposite of Humphrey. I think that's really fun. He's got, he's skinny as hell. He's skinny as a bat, but he's got a lot of upside if he can fill himself out and stay healthy, especially. So I do like that. Brandon Stevens had a really good good year last year. I think he'll be the nickel for this team. So yeah, I do really. It's going to be a similar defense. It's going to be obviously a good defense. It's the Ravens, but no Mike McDonald. There will be some learning curves.
Yeah, and I'll just say, man, it's obviously one of the better teams in the NFL. They're going to be up there competing every single week with the Bengals, with the Chiefs, with the top, with the Bills, with the top tier teams, in the AFC. And it's going to be an absolute rat race of, who overcomes, what challenges, but one of the better football teams in the NFL, that's for sure.
And going on to the predictions for the Ravens, I have the Ravens finishing at 11-6, second in the division, obviously making the playoffs. So, a little bit of a drop off from last year, but still a playoff team, second in the division, a great team. You've got the MVP alien quarterback that can really elevate you. Really, it comes down to him. He can play the MVP football again, and they could totally finish first. I could totally see it. I'm just personally a big Bengals guy, but the Ravens have the third highest odds in the league to win the Super Bowl. So I guess we're just a little bit lower on than Vegas is, but that shows how good they are.
Yeah, I have them at 12-5, finishing second. Me and you are right on par with with our thoughts on this division. But it is probably the hardest division in football. So it's no slouch to any of these teams. You have a tough schedule. You have to play each other 2 times a year for every single team. So it's an absolute bloodbath in the AFC North. Hopefully, you guys shout out again for this video. We got a lot of love last year for the AFC North, so I'm hoping it. You like this content, and we get some more AFC North love.
Yeah, AFC North has the best fans. And real quick, before we get out of here, let's get our division award ceremony going. Who is the offensive MVP for the AFC North? Who is your prediction?
Gotta go with the Cinderella story, man. It's Joe Burrow for me. It's his comeback season. He's gonna lead the Bengals to the playoffs, no doubt, and he's gonna have just an awesome season. And T. Higgins is on a franchise tag year, so he's going to go off. Jamar Chase, one of the best receivers. This team got better this offseason, so it's a Cinderella comeback story from an injury, and I think Joe Burrow is the most valuable, and the MVP of this division.
Yeah, we both have the Bengals winning the division, and my thinking is very similar to yours. My offensive MVP is going to be Jamar Chase. I think he takes a massive step up this year and really hits his ceiling, hits his stride, and completely just has a breakout season. Finishes as the wide receiver one in fantasy. I've got really high hopes for Jamar Chase. He's been really good the last few years, but I think he really hit that stride this year, and he just has an awesome season, really helping out Joe Burrow, which is why I give it to him. And yeah, I do think that it's fair having Burrow and Chase, and it's only right. Chase has Burrow on his shirt right there. It's only right, man. Such a great connection.
Yeah, I mean, he's due. He's due for just an incredible big breakout season. He's obviously done just so well every year, but we've been waiting for that Justin Jefferson, Tyreek Hill type breakout. So I love that pick.
Let's hear your defensive MVP for the AFC North.
I got nothing too bold this year, man. I'm going more with the safer pick. It's safe stores this year, and I'm going Miles Garrett, man. I mean, probably a top 5 football player in the NFL. What he did last year was incredible. I see no reason why he can't do it again. He's just the freakiest defensive player in the NFL to me. So it's only fair I give him the award. But I mean, the guy that you picked right there, I mean, two of the best football players in the NFL, man, in the same division.
Super hard to pick. Like this has to be the hardest division to pick. An award winner for defense. There's the two best edge
Right.
rushers really there with Max Crosby. It's just beautiful. Like I said, I predicted Miles Garrett to win the Defensive Player of the Year in the league last year in this exact episode. So I do like that we're paying his respect. Just look at him, dude is the scariest man on the planet. But this year, I am going to predict T.J. Watt. He's just due for Defensive Player of the Year at this point. He's been leading the league in sacks for too long. He just has too productive of seasons. He's too consistent with it. He really elevates that Steelers defense. We see how they are without him. It's a completely, day and night different team. So I do think TJ Watt has a chance to finally win the award this year. And this isn't even really an AFC North prediction for defensive MVP. It's really just we're predicting the DPOY because that's how good these two are.
100%. Yeah. I mean, just pick your poison, man. I mean, these two best edge rushers in football, and I don't really think it's a debate. It's these two are the baddest. They're the baddest of the bad, and they just they go at each other. For who's better, and it's almost impossible to say who is better.
Well, let's hear your rookie of the year for the division.
This is going to be a little bit more fun, exciting one. I'm going with Steelers rookie wide receiver Roman Wilson, a guy who's played in a pro style offense. I feel like he can complement Russell Wilson or Justin Fields, whoever's starting, their play style. He can kind of run every route in the book. And it's just on trend with the Steelers drafting incredible wide receivers. And Deontay Johnson departs. There's room for targets. There's room for somebody to step up. And I think it's gonna be Roman Wilson.
Absolutely love it. Like we said, he's kind of that Chris Olave mold. So, that room definitely has the opportunity for him to be that guy. I'm going to stay with the Steelers. We both said that they had the best draft in the NFL, and we're backing it up here. But, they drafted one of my favorite players in the entire class in Troy Fautanu out of Washington. He's going to be a really good left tackle, man. They drafted one of my favorite right tackles last year in Broderick Jones, and I think him and Troy Fautanu is just such a bookend, awesome tackle duo for a long, long time. Fautanu's got great upside. I thought he was the best mover of any of the tackles in this class, up there with all. It's hard to say, but he's a lot smaller, so he might be a little bit more agile. And yeah, I just love Fautanu, love the outlook. I think the Steelers' offensive line has such a bright outlook.
100%. I love it. Troy Fautanu, one of the bigger steals, just on pace with how the Steelers drafted. it's only fair that we picked 2 Steelers players here because they had the best draft in the NFL.
2 years running, maybe even 3 years running. Absolutely crazy stuff. But we'll go on to our division winner. We've already, mentioned it, but our division winner for the AFC North is the Bengals. Both of us were actually agreeing on this surprisingly, and we probably won't see it too often. But I think we both just are high on the Bengals. We're higher than consensus for sure. We're higher than the Vegas odds. We're, a little bit lower on the Ravens than Vegas, and yeah, I think we mentioned it pretty well. But the Bengals have a pretty fun outlook with Burrow coming back.
Yes, sir, Dan, and, before you ask me, I'm gonna put you on the spot. Any bold takes for this year, for this division?
Completely putting me on the spot here. I am gonna say that Jamar Chase wins Offensive Player of the Year, and and yeah, the Bengals win the division, which isn't too bold. But yeah, I do think the Bengals just have a revelation year. All they have to do is stay healthy, and I think their coaching is one of the best in the NFL with Taylor and Anarumo. So I do think it's the Bengals just having a big boom year. Do you have any X hot takes?
Gave me time to think of one. I don't know if this is even humanly possible, but, a hot take is every team in this division could finish with 10 wins or more. I mean, it's out there. I don't know if that's possible. I think it is, but I feel like this. If there's any division to do it, the AFC North is the division where every single team could finish with at least 10 wins.
This is the division that has that chance 100%. Almost did it last year. Just crazy, crazy stuff. I think the Bengals and Steelers had to fight out for that last spot. So yeah, it's pretty crazy stuff. Mike Tomlin's always going to be right there. So yeah, awesome, awesome episode. Our first deep dive of the summer. We have 7 more of these coming, so definitely stay tuned for your team. But thank you guys for tuning in to another episode of the NFL Seekers podcast. Like, comment, subscribe. Peace out.
Peace.